So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. Thank you for joining. Just a small technical setup. We just want to check that your Zoom is optimized to see the slides properly. So if you do see a number of black boxes of attendees, it is possible to hover the mouse just over your own box and select the middle option, which should say small active speaker video, which should reduce all of the boxes on your screen to just show my speaker video. Hopefully that's straightforward enough and that your Zoom setup is allowing you to see the slides okay. So again, thanks for joining. This morning we're going to have slides and some content to cover for about 15, 20 minutes. And then at the end, we will open it up for Q&A. And I'd really welcome any questions that you have on the content that I've covered today. So whatever your role is, I'm fully confident that the important work you're doing today is quite different from the important work that you were doing over a month ago. In this changed environment we're in, that we're not only dealing with changed work, but it's also with the backdrop of constant remote working, trying to lead in a virtual world, and also the health and safety concerns for our relatives and friends. So actually, when you think about it, staying focused and being productive in this time is actually already an achievement in itself. So what I've done really is pull together content from a number of thought leaders in this area and recent research. As recent as March, some research was published, as well as blending that with my own experience as a leader when I had to lead teams through significant change in the past. My role today, I'm an associate with Right Management, and we work with a lot of leaders trying to navigate times of change in normal times, but now it's the significant change we're going through. So today's agenda really is, I just click through. A recent report actually published by McKinsey was saying that regardless of the plan you have for when a crisis hits, it's really much more important that you have the right mindset and that you have the right behaviors to execute in these times. And so that's what I wanted to cover today, was really, what is the right mindset? What does that look like? And how can we move ourselves into that space to get better results? And then if we have the right mindset, what are the behaviors that we need to engage in so as we can lead our teams and our people through this time? And then the outcomes from this webinar, I'm hoping, are some key takeaways that you can take back as soon as we're finished this morning that are practical, that you can implement into your role from today. If a lot of this is already stuff that you do already, great. Then maybe from today you'll take on the mantle to actually help coach some other people within your organization and help them through to bring these behaviors and this right mindset out into their world. So what is the right mindset? Well, I like to call it's the lens that we look through. It's really how we interpret situations and how that interpretation affects our behavior and our words. So it really matters actually how we interpret what's going on around us. Because if we are in a space of a fearful mindset or a fixed mindset, then that will affect how we represent what we want to get done to our people. And so I work with a number of leaders even through these times, and I see a few trends. There are the person who brings with them a fearful mindset, which has some negative emotional state with it, and that comes out as a reaction. And so event happens, reaction happens. And that can be quite negative for us and our teams. Then there's the other type of leader who maybe is a bit of an introvert, and their reaction to negative times or times of change is actually to go inward. And so they often go into the office and close the door. I have a client who by trade or by expertise is a software developer, And in times of change, his immediate default reaction was to go back to coding because that's where he felt comfortable. It was his comfort zone. And it's really being aware of these things, because him coding behind a closed door is not going to be of any use to his people. So really, how do you behave when it comes to this times of change? And knowing that by reacting or going inward is not our best approach for leading our people properly. In actual fact, having a clear lens that we can see through and employ a fact-based approach to what's happening helps to inform what is the next right action I need to take. So you don't have all the answers and things are unclear, but you do have enough to take the next right action. And so that's not reacting and it's not going inward. And when you do this, it means that you will affect the confidence of everyone involved. So similarly, when you act with fear, that has a contagion to it. Your people start to become fearful. But if you act with the clear confidence and clarity around what happens next, then that becomes contagious with your people. And they start to become confident, not that we have the answer, not that we know where we're going exactly, but that we know where we're going for the next while. It's a little bit like driving the car on the road at night on a road you're not familiar with. The lights will light up so far ahead of you, and you have to trust there's a road beyond what you can see. So it's the next right action and having that in your mindset. And of course, it also clearly influences your ability to navigate these difficulties. If you are in a space of fear, then you're not going to be as able to navigate the difficult times as if you're in a space where you have a clear mindset. A clear mindset is not being overly optimistic or saying everything's going to be fine. It's just saying, I see what it is right now. I see the next action I can take, and maybe I'll actually learn from this. So there's a bit of studies done on this. I mean, there's one actually famous book out there by Dr. Carol Dweck, and she talks about the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. This is another framework which might be interesting for you to take some moments to read. Each step here would be a level on the framework where I'm hovering the mouse. So if this first box is level 1, then we go all the way down to level 7 here. And this comes from a framework developed by Bruce Schneider. This leadership mindset framework really gives us the different levels that people can be at when it comes to dealing with times of significant change. And so maybe take a minute to read where you might be. What's your default reaction to when this change happens? You know, do you take it on that it's all your fault, it's a disaster, we'll never recover? Or, you know, do you move out of that blame mode quite quickly and into more acceptance, and you're just about managing, which is kind of level 3 here? Or really, are you more through into level 4 and level 5, where you can see that actually by collaborating to solve some of these problems is going to be our way out? I can't think my way out all by myself. I need to collaborate with other people. And then moving all the way to level 7, where it's like, okay, I'm a leader. This is what I'm here to do. I need to collaborate. I need to have some vision forward, and I need to learn from this and move forward. So the key thing here really is being aware that there's different types of mindsets we can have, being aware of what your default mindset might be when it comes to times of change. And when this significant change we're in at the moment happened, what was your default mindset? And some people can work through these levels quite quickly. Some people get stuck. And it's really, where are you? And you may be easier for you to recognize some people who you are with as to where are they. So we can recognize it in others a little quicker than we recognize it in ourselves. And so that awareness is the thing to try and bring us forward into the upper levels, where we can start to see beyond the crisis, beyond the issues we're having, into what's possible. What can we do? Who can help? Where are we going? And then we can communicate that with our teams and set a path. So once we have the right mindset, it's important to also layer on the key behaviors on top of that. So, I mean, there's many leadership behaviors, we know this, but really for times of significant change, there's 3 key behaviors that are very important for making progress and achieving outcomes in these times. decision making, communication, and execution. And I just want to talk about these in a little bit more detail. So whatever your business priorities were in the past, prior to this significant change, they have most definitely moved on. I mean, often clients are focused on driving revenue, gaining market share, acquiring new talent. And a lot of those priorities now have had to be paused or shifted more towards controlling costs, maybe managing liquidity, or changing the supply chain efforts that impacts that are happening. And so it's important now to decide what are the 3 to 5 things that you and your team are going to focus on to get through this next phase. And open to pivot as events evolve. I mean, we are in what is described as an emergent time, so we can only go with the facts that we have. So as events evolve, it's important that you can pivot and that you're not stuck with the 3 to 5 priorities you have defined. But defining what's getting done, it's equally important to define what is no longer going to get done. So there will be resources aligned to projects, and those projects are no longer purposeful for this time. And so it's equally important to decide what's not getting done, so those resources get redeployed into what is going to impact and make progress in the new world. And of course, anyone who studied strategy or Porter knows it's all about trade-offs. So you do have to make those trade-offs in today's time. You know, are you going to focus on what's urgent or what's absolutely necessary for this next phase? And maybe you have to prioritize survival today versus the success of tomorrow. And only you will know that for your own particular teams and your own particular business. But these decisions must get made. And often, you know, when it comes to times of change, we want to wait until we have all of the information before we make a decision. But actually, this is not a time to wait for precision and accuracy. Speed is more important. So making decisions without all of the information and being okay and comfortable with that ambiguity is important, and it's an important skill to develop. Also decide who the decision makers are. If you have a centralized decision-making team, then it's probably better to keep it that way for now. There's a lot of research that says, you know, try to empower the front line, but really at times of change, it has been proven people do not respond well for their workload increasing and their responsibilities increasing. You will find the particular people in your team who put their hands up for more, and that's great. But I wouldn't do it as a default position, because people are trying to find their way in this change themselves, and layering more work on them won't always be the answer. So decide who the decision makers are. If you have a distributed decision-making process within your teams, then stick to that, and make sure that people feel that they still have that ability to make those decisions. And finally, you know, on decision-making, because we're making these decisions without all of the information, mistakes are going to happen. But it's really important that you don't punish these mistakes. How you respond to these mistakes is just as important as to how you respond to the overall change itself. So it's having the right mindset about it, which says, okay, it's happened, let's learn from it and let's move on. So you acknowledge it, learn, and if the team are entering a blaming orientation, because people tend to do that, especially when there's fear and change, it's your role as their manager and leader to reorient them towards what do we need to do next to solve the bigger problem. Blame is not helpful. A few words that I like to warn clients about is if you ever hear of should've, would've, or could've coming out in people's narrative, it's important to reorient them towards, okay, well, what's possible? We are where we are, what's next? Because that ruminating is never going to be useful for forward progression. Okay, communication. I mean, this is so important at times of change. And as I referred earlier to some clients who are introverted, they prefer to go into their offices, close the door, and think their way through a crisis. But actually, now more than ever, you need to be communicating with your teams, and with your peer group as well, and with your management. There needs to be constant communication about what's happening, what's known, what's not known. It's important that you're clear and realistic. This is not a time to be overly optimistic. It is a time to be realistic. If you try to say everything's going to be fine, you will lose credibility with your teams, because nobody actually is in a position to say that. We know that we're working through it. Be clear about what you know and be transparent about what you don't know. Trying to think that you have the answer to everything or portray that you have the answer to everything is actually not the approach here. So this is what we know. This is what we don't know. This is what we're doing about what we don't know to try and find out more. That's the best approach. And when you are framing your communication, remember, it's not about you, it's about your teams. It's about who you're communicating to, what's important to them, what's relevant to them. It's not about what you want to say. Many of us make that mistake when we're communicating, saying, well, I want to say this. Well, what do they need to hear? Where are they at and what's relevant to them at this point? And what is their perspective on the topic you need to talk to them about? That will make for much more meaningful communication. And if you have a cadence of communication with your team, now is the time to double it. And a lot of clients have a reaction to that and say, what, double? First of all, I don't have time. We're in a time of crisis. Secondly, I might not have an update. And actually, that's okay. Even if the update is there is no update, it is better to give that update. The reason being, if there is an information vacuum, it will be filled with fiction. And fiction from your people may come from a place of fear. So in order to avoid filling that information vacuum with fear and fiction, you need to, as a leader and manager, step up and say, okay, well, here's where we're at compared to this time last week. And by the way, there is no update, but here's what we're doing for finding out more for next week. And that will allay fears and prevent people from putting out the fiction that they believe through their lens as to what's going on. People start to interpret words and behaviors through their lens, and they can start to make up things that are real to them, but it's not purposeful for the greater team. So as a leader and manager, you must make sure people are all on the same page and kept up to date. What's really useful at the moment, actually, in this virtual world is when you check in with people at the start of meetings. I think a lot of people are finding the video calls slightly intense, and they're also missing that time you get to decompress between meetings, even if it's a short walk between offices or in your car. And so having a quick check-in, especially with your own teams just before a meeting, is very purposeful. It gives them that opportunity for what might have been the office banter. It also gives them a chance to maybe share exactly how they're feeling, which will help you to inform how you communicate with them. And also it may be purposeful for you to share how you're feeling. I'm not encouraging a whole, oversharing or being overly vulnerable with them, but actually showing the human side. If it's a day where maybe there's a lot of background noise in your house because, the children are acting up, say it. And that gives them permission then to also be human. Also, listening is the equal part of communication. Really listen to understand what is being said. Within that, you will know how your people are doing and if they understand what their role within this change is. Finally, navigating this virtual world is new for a lot of us. I mean, many of us would have dipped in and out of this in the past, but communication now is all being done virtual. And so, know how to do this. Encourage people to stream their videos if you're having a team meeting. That will make them feel included and part of something. Encourage them to use the chat option on the video calls, which kind of replaces the office banter maybe. Encourage people to connect more. And make sure that they will stream their video by you streaming yours, leading by example. Make sure they know how to set it up properly so they're getting the optimal view. And also, if you have people on your team who from face-to-face meetings were less likely to speak up, they're even more less likely to speak up in virtual meetings. So you as the leader and manager, learn ways to facilitate those discussions so you can thread them into the discussion and make sure their voice is heard. And finally, execute. The third most important behavior. As a leader, you need to get clear on how you will execute and get a reputation that you are the one that will execute reliably. At the end of the day, it's getting things done that's going to make the difference in getting us through these times of change. So, basics, right? Once you've decided your priorities, assign what needs to get done, by whom and when. People like to know what they need to do, and also it distracts them from the fearful thinking that may be part of their psyche at the moment. So let's get clear, who's doing what and when. State what's not going to get worked on for now. So the things you decided that were going to be deprioritized or paused, communicate that, state that, and make sure people know that that is no longer getting worked on. This frees up those necessary resources. If you don't state that, people still may work on pet projects, and it becomes one of those gray zones. Be clear about what we now need to work on, and that means this is what we're not working on. This is why, and move it onwards. And then you must review this. So how are we doing? I don't know what the cadence of your business is like, but maybe, I know a lot of leaders at the moment are doing daily stand-ups, as they call them, with their teams, just to hook in and see how are things going. Are we all still aligned on the priorities? Any updates? Let's move on. It's literally 15 minutes. Maybe the cadence of your business means that you actually know it's more likely that it's on a weekly basis. Whatever that is right for you, common sense prevails. But make sure it's a regular review and that you're open to those pivots. So we've executed on this priority. This is what's happened. It's not working as we expected. What is the pivot that's needed now? And you know that through the constant review. And be clear so people know what to expect, and in return, what's expected of them. I find the cadence of one-to-ones with key members of your staff is really useful for checking in with them on this. So based on what we shared at the team meeting, what do you understand your key priorities are now? And what do you understand you can expect from me in this environment? Doing those check-ins ensures that people understand what's expected, and then they can execute properly. And then your job, of course, is to make sense of these gray zones that may exist for people. In insignificant change, there are a lot of gray zones because it's very emergent, it's quite dynamic, and it's new territory for everybody. So clarify what you can and what you can't. You state what you don't know yet. It's still a bit of a gray zone, but this is what we're doing to try and find some clarity around that. And acknowledge what's working and what's not. It's really important that it's seen, like if something's not working, that we can change rather than keep going just because we've decided on this priority. And finally, something that's forgotten, especially when times of change like this happen, is self-care. So, the analogy of if you're on a flight and the oxygen masks come down, they say put on your own first before you help someone else. And it really goes the same for leadership. You have to self-care in order to be there with the right mindset and awareness of what the right behaviors are, if you can do that for your team. And so self-care can mean, exercise, diet, but I think more advanced versions would be including things like getting quiet time, meditating, using some of those Headspace apps, just finding the time to calm some of the thinking that's going on in our minds. And there's also conscious breathing can be another skill some leaders use. Whatever it takes to try and bring some self-care to your daily routine, so as your mindset can be clearer, calmer, and your lens clearer. And that means that you'll be showing up as that calm and confident leader for your teams, rather than one that's coming from a place of fear or chaos. And the beauty about self-care is when you do it and you can share some of that with your team, there's also a contagion with that. There's a leader I work with, and he's very much into Ironman and marathons, triathlons, and actually slowly a lot of his senior team have taken up the same initiatives. So there is definitely a burden, if you want to say, as a leader and manager, that whatever you engage in, there's a contagion too. And so if you do engage in self-care, then sharing that with your team may have that contagion effect, which brings up the performance of everyone. There's some initiatives happening at the moment across companies where they're having team, Zoom sessions to do yoga or Pilates or any of this. So there are things you could really consider. You have a team building element, a self-care element, and that can work, especially in these times. So self-care, even though it's the last on the list, it should be prioritized. And so, what are the key takeaways from what I've shared with you this morning? Well, it's really the do's and don'ts. So, decide that speed over precision is essential. Communicate clearly and often, set realistic expectations, and mind your physical, mental, and emotional self. Don't go to your comfort zone. So if your default mindset means you do what's comfortable for you, get aware of that and don't do it. Don't become overly controlling. Again, that can be a comfort zone for people. Don't assume your people are okay. Do the check-ins. And don't allow bad behavior to creep in, because often what can happen is at these times, leaders don't work on what's not okay because we're so busy trying to swim and not drown, but actually do catch bad behaviors in the act, because they would have a negative contagion effect if you don't. And so if you have any additional needs for information or assistance, please feel free to reach out to my colleague Carly. Her contact details are on the screen now, and she'd be delighted to direct you in whatever way we can help best at Right Management. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'm going to open up to Q&A. And if anyone would like to ask a question, you can speak up, or you can also raise your hand through the chat function, or you can type in a question in the chat function as well, whatever works for everybody. Okay, Carly, are there any questions on the chat?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Anything unclear to anybody from everything I've covered this morning? Okay, thanks, Paul. So a question, how do you strike a balance between checking in with staff regularly and micromanaging? Yeah, so really the check-ins are more about how they're doing on a personal basis rather than how they're doing with their work. And so I think that's the difference, Paul, which is, micromanaging would be, saying, how are you getting on with this task? Where are you at with it? How are you doing for the deadline? Whereas checking in can be, how are things going? How are you finding the remote working? What are you missing about the office environment? And they're two different, things that happen. So it's really knowing that you're checking in on the human rather than the worker with regards to when you're asking those questions. Oh, you're welcome. Anyone else have any questions? No? Okay, one more here. Okay, interested to hear what your approach to keeping in touch with employees who have been laid off. Good question, actually, Doreen. Yeah, so I think with regards to that, it's, they have been laid off, but a lot of the time now the consideration is it may be temporary, and so it might be just keeping in touch with, you know, an email or even a Zoom call if you wanted, just to see how they're doing. I think for a while you need to let people work their way through the change that has happened to them. So maybe it's giving it a little bit of space so they can process the change. They can process that now they are no longer part of the team and they're on the outside, and then checking back in with them at a time where, you know, maybe it feels like an okay time that they can talk about it. So when you're initially laid off, and especially in these times, you know, there's going to be an emotional element to that. And you need to give people the time to process that change before you re-engage with them. So let them go through that, then re-engage and see how they're doing, and even maybe offer some support and advice to them as to, you know, how they can navigate this new world. That can be the advice I give. So if there's no other questions then, I really appreciate you all joining this morning. Thanks for your engagement and your attention. I hope you can at least take one action from this that you can weave into your work after today's webinar. So thanks again, stay safe, and I hope maybe to speak with some of you on a one-to-one at some stage.